The Galactic Council Chamber was larger than any human building Dr. Marcus Wren had ever seen. Shaped like a spiral tower turned on its side, it held representatives from hundreds of advanced species, their voices echoing in a quiet storm of alien languages. In the center, under a dome that shimmered with stars, stood the accused, not a person, but an entire species. Humanity. Earth had only joined the Galactic Federation 50 years ago, and already they stood on trial. The charge: violating the Universal Treaty of Armed Conflict. The prosecutor, Ambassador Lyra of the Eridani, stood tall and graceful, her silver skin glowing faintly as she spoke. Her words were calm, but her eyes burned with accusation. She cited the recent events on Selenos 5, a peaceful outpost near the edge of Council space, where a rogue fleet had been neutralized, not destroyed, not repelled, simply stopped. With no shots fired, no buildings damaged, and no deaths recorded, the human-led defense force had handled the threat in a way that no species had ever seen before. That in itself was the problem. No weapons, no declared tactics, and yet, complete success. Lyra accused humanity of developing invisible, psychological methods of warfare that defied the spirit of peace the Federation stood for. "The chamber," murmured as her voice echoed, and hundreds of alien eyes turned to Marcus Wren. He stood quietly in a plain black suit, no medals, no armor, just a calm expression and tired eyes. As he stepped forward to speak, he knew what they were thinking. How could a young species like humanity be so dangerous without ever appearing violent? "My name is Dr. Marcus Wren," he began, his voice carrying with surprising strength. "And I am not a soldier. I am here because you do not understand what we are, and what we carry inside us." He paused, watching the crowd. The incident on Selenos 5 was not an act of aggression. It was a demonstration of discipline, of control. Some laughed softly, others scoffed, but most listened. He explained how Earth's history was filled with wars, far more brutal and frequent than any known galactic conflict. He told them that humans had learned, over centuries of bloodshed, that real victory doesn't come from strength. It comes from knowing when not to use it. "We do not fight because we enjoy it," he said. "We fight when we must. But more importantly, we train ourselves so we don't have to." He showed a brief recording from Selenos 5, human soldiers, walking calmly through a battlefield, their presence alone enough to make the enemy surrender. No shots, no shouting, just silence and efficiency. The mercenaries had dropped their weapons and begged for protection. The video ended, and the chamber was quiet. "We've learned to win before the battle begins," Marcus added softly. "Because the alternative is something we promised ourselves we'd never repeat." He could see it now, confusion turning into fear, fear slowly becoming curiosity. Why would anyone fear a war that never began? Why would a species so calm in appearance be seen as dangerous? The truth was beginning to settle, unspoken but heavy. The trial was not just about laws. It was about understanding a species that had walked through fire and come out colder, sharper, not cruel, but aware. Aware of how far they could go if they ever let go of restraint. As Marcus finished his statement, the judges leaned in, whispering among themselves. Outside the chamber, in the vacuum of space, the human fleet waited, unarmed, unmoving, but not unnoticed. For the first time, many in the council began to ask a different question, one they hadn't dared to consider before. Not, did humans break the law? But rather, what happens if they ever decide not to follow it? Selenos 5 had always been a quiet place, a joint outpost built by both humans and the Valari to monitor trade routes and assist in peacekeeping across the border systems. It was not a battlefield, nor was it expected to become one. But on that particular day, the sky turned black with the arrival of a rogue mercenary fleet, ships unmarked and aggressive, their weapons already locked. The Velari, delicate in nature, and known for their diplomacy, were not trained for such an attack. Panic spread through their ranks as alarms blared, systems overloaded, and the scent of fear filled the air. Yet, within that same chaos, the humans moved differently. Calm, focused, and without hesitation, they began a silent operation. No shouting, no confusion, only coordinated action. Civilian corridors were sealed and evacuated methodically. Energy grids were redirected. Communication lines were quietly hijacked. The attacking ships, unaware, continued their approach until their targeting systems suddenly failed. Sensors went blind, and their engines locked mid-flight. From the outside, it looked like magic. But it wasn't magic. It was preparation. Human engineers had quietly upgraded the outpost's defense systems months ago, turning the station itself into a silent guardian. As the mercenaries docked, expecting a quick and easy takeover, they were greeted by no resistance, only doors that led them into containment zones. One by one, they walked into their own capture. Not a single shot fired, not a single scream heard. When the Galactic Council forces finally arrived, ready for war, it was already over. The outpost stood untouched. Every mercenary was accounted for, unharmed, disarmed, and waiting. But what truly unsettled the Council was not just the efficiency of the human response, but the reaction of the invaders. During the investigation, one of the mercenary leaders, a scarred reptilian known for brutality, sat in the witness seat, eyes lowered, voice trembling. "We thought we were predators, until we met humans," he said. That single sentence was now played in the chamber as Dr. Marcus Wren stood at the center once more. He presented the full footage, the calm strategies, the peaceful subduing, the lack of violence, and asked only one question. Is this the action of a violent species, or a responsible one? The council chamber fell into deep silence, disturbed only by the quiet hum of translated words echoing through the room. What disturbed many was not the presence of fear, but the absence of aggression. The humans had shown no anger, no desire for revenge, only a controlled, precise response designed to protect, not punish. To some, this was admirable. To others, terrifying. Because if a species could end a battle before it began, without emotion, what else were they capable of? The footage showed human security teams treating injured mercenaries, offering water, even shielding them from the cold. Mercy was offered not because it was expected, but because it was chosen. And that choice, perhaps, was what made the council nervous. They had seen empires rise with power, but never one that held such power quietly in its hands, unused yet undeniable. As the video ended, the chamber remained hushed. Dr. Wren did not speak again. He didn't need to. The images, the voices, the surrender, it all spoke for him. Around him, council members looked at one another, not with blame, but with uncertainty. The trial had started with accusations, but now it carried something else, a question none dared speak aloud. If humanity could win without war, what would happen if one day they chose not to? That silent thought lingered heavier than any verdict. Dr. Marcus Wren stood once again in the center of the Galactic Council chamber, the glow of ancient stars above reflecting off his datapad as he prepared to share something that few in the bombed galaxy had ever truly studied, the long, painful history of Earth. He tapped the console and the room dimmed. A holographic timeline appeared, stretching back thousands of Earth years. Wars, revolutions, collapses, rebuilds, names no alien had ever heard appeared in fiery letters. Rome, Genghis, Napoleon, Hiroshima, Cold War, World War III. What you see here, Dr. Wren said quietly, is not a list of battles. It is the story of how we became who we are. The images changed, not just of war, but of faces filled with fear, courage, loss, and determination. Unlike most species in the Council who evolved in stable environments or under the guidance of ancient mentors, humans had clawed their way up from a planet that never made survival easy. Storms, predators, disease, internal conflict, everything was a fight. But from that struggle came something strange. Not only did they survive, they learned to use the pain. War, for them, had become more than survival. It was a mirror, a forge, and eventually, a science. Humans had turned chaos into structure, emotion into strategy. Every mistake was recorded, studied, taught. From the ruins of each conflict, they built something stronger, not just weapons, but systems, rules, and philosophies. We are not proud of our past, Dr. Wren admitted, eyes scanning the silent crowd. But we do not hide it, because it teaches us what we must never become. Again. The aliens listened, many uncomfortable. Their species, by comparison, had learned peace early. Their wars were few and distant, their histories short. For some, the very idea of studying war felt wrong. But humans had studied it in detail, not to repeat it, but to understand it, to control it. What shocked the Council was not how powerful humanity could be, but how clearly they understood that power, and how tightly they held it back. Peace for us, Wren continued, is not something that happens naturally. We choose it, every day. And we choose it because we know what happens when we don't. More images appeared, of ceasefires, rebuilding, aid missions, treaties formed after the worst of times. He explained how, after the last World War, humans began shifting their thinking. Global cooperation replaced conquest. Psychological training was given equal weight to military strength. Empathy was seen not as weakness, but as a skill. Where once they had armies of destruction, now they trained forces in diplomacy, technology, and crisis control. Many in the chamber were beginning to realize the deeper truth that humanity's strength was not just in ships or machines, but in the discipline they had forged through centuries of pain. While others were born in balance, humans had made peace by force of will, and that perhaps was more dangerous than any weapon. You fear what we might do, Dr. Wren said softly. But ask yourselves, what have we done? He looked around. We have offered help. We have shared knowledge. We have walked into war zones to stop them, not to start them. And yes, we are prepared, but only because we know what unprepared looks like. A heavy silence settled over the Council. For the first time, many began to see humanity not as a threat, but as a warning, a living example of what happens when struggle never ends and how a species can rise not by escaping its darkness, but by mastering it. In the sea. And it was not humanity's weapons that made them feared. It was the understanding that they no longer needed them. And yet, they still carried the memory of when they did. As the trial continued in the Galactic Council chamber, the lights dimmed once more, and a new image filled the holographic sky, the glowing outline of Earth's modern defense network. But there were no massive weapons or towering battle stations. Instead, it showed a map of influence, reputation, and strategic presence. Dr. Marcus Wren stepped forward again, calm as ever, and began to speak in a measured voice. Our strength today is not based on destruction, he said. It's based on understanding fear and never needing to use it. The room remained quiet as he introduced the Council to the core of Earth's military strategy, the doctrine of deterrence. Unlike other powers that gathered fleets and firepower, Earth had learned that the greatest weapon was the idea of war itself, not in fighting it, but in shaping how others thought about it. He brought up the first example, the siege of Tharnos. A colony world was under threat by a massive pirate armada. Hundreds of ships, well-armed and ruthless, surrounded the planet. Local forces had no hope. But then, only one ship arrived, a human diplomatic cruiser, unarmed. The pirates scanned it, laughed, and prepared to attack. But as soon as they confirmed the vessel belonged to Earth's Strategic Defense Initiative, they stopped. Within an hour, the entire fleet surrendered without a single word exchanged. Why? Because stories had already spread. Stories of what humans had done in other battles, what they could do, even if they chose not to. That single ship, empty of weapons, had carried a heavier threat than 1,000 cannons, the unknown. Dr. Wren moved to the next case, Project Silent Pulse. It had been a silent operation during a rebellion on the moon of Darson III. The rebels had captured government buildings, preparing for war. But before the first shot could be fired, every electronic system across the moon shut down. No explosions, no alarms, just darkness. The human-designed EMP net had been activated, cutting off weapons, vehicles, and communications without harming a single person. Within hours, the rebels surrendered. When asked why, one of them simply said, "They turned off our world like flipping a switch. We never even saw them." And then came the final story, Operation Broken Chain. A civil war had erupted on the Rye, twin planets of Ravon and Serene, where two ruling families were tearing their people apart. Humans didn't send soldiers. Instead, they launched a quiet campaign of truth, broadcasting real-time facts, exposing secrets, feeding open-source information to the citizens. Within weeks, the war stopped. The people forced their leaders to step down peacefully. The infrastructure remained untouched. Not a single human set foot on the planets. And yet, it was humanity that ended the war. As Dr. Wren shared these stories, many in the council looked around, confused and uneasy. This wasn't warfare. It wasn't what they understood. No ships destroyed, no cities burned. And yet, Earth had achieved what fleets could not. One senator from the Andari, a peaceful race known for their diplomacy, finally broke the silence. "You mean, they win wars with psychology?" she asked, her voice a mix of shock and awe. Dr. Wren nodded. "We win them before they begin," he replied. And that truth hit harder than any weapon. The room, once filled with suspicion, now held something deeper. A quiet realization that humanity had mastered something far beyond strength. They had turned war into a game of the mind, and they were always 5 moves ahead. Their greatest weapon wasn't in their hands, but in their ability to make others believe fighting them was never worth it. And that quiet power, that unseen edge, made the entire galaxy pause. Because they weren't just fighting enemies. They were ending wars no one even knew had started. For a while, the Galactic Council chamber was filled with silence, the kind that follows a truth too heavy to deny. But silence doesn't last long in politics, and soon, voices began to rise. Not in unity, but in resistance. A small yet vocal group of species, mostly those with long histories of peace and deeply held cultural values, began to push back against what they had seen. To them, humanity's way of ending wars wasn't heroic. It was unsettling. They said Earth's influence was too quiet, too calculated, and far too effective in ways that couldn't be tracked or predicted. Delegates from the Mervani, Solari, and Otran called it manipulation hidden behind mercy, arguing that the human presence bent conflicts toward invisible outcomes that no one else could control. "If a species can end a war without touching a weapon," one senator said, "how can we ever know when they've started one?" Others nodded. The more they looked at Earth's strategies, the more they feared the unseen hand guiding outcomes from the shadows. These concerns gave birth to a breakaway coalition known as the Alliance for Transparent Peace, who demanded that all human military forces be banned from joint operations until strict oversight could be established. Though the vote barely passed, it was enough. Human fleets were quietly pulled back from outer patrol zones, replaced with standard council forces. Earth didn't protest. They simply obeyed, watching from a distance. Dr. Wren stepped aside from the spotlight, saying only, "We will not argue with fear, but we will remain ready." For a short time, the galaxy returned to its usual rhythm. Council ships flew their patrols, treaties were signed. But in the outer systems, the ones farthest from the core, where help always came late, something began to change. Reports trickled in. Pirate fleets once driven into hiding began to move freely. Smuggling routes reappeared. Colonies on the edge stopped receiving aid convoys. At first, the council ignored it. Isolated cases, they said. A minor issue. But then, entire systems went dark. Trade worlds were overrun. Convoys vanished without a trace. On the mining moon of Crevasse 12, a distress signal played for 6 hours straight before the feed was cut off. When rescue ships finally arrived, they found the place abandoned, stripped of resources, its people scattered or taken. One pattern became clear. These attacks were happening exactly where human patrols used to be. The pirates weren't just taking advantage. They were following the absence of Earth's deterrence like predators sensing an open gate. When questioned, one captured pirate laughed bitterly and said, "We waited years for the humans to leave. Now there's no one left who scares us." The council met in emergency session. Suddenly, their earlier doubts began to look like mistakes. The systems once stabilized by human presence were now in chaos. Dr. Wren was invited back, not as a defendant, but as an advisor. He didn't gloat, didn't criticize. He simply presented the data, before and after. Charts showed a rapid rise in conflict the moment humans withdrew. The uncomfortable truth stood tall before them. Even when humanity chose peace, their very presence had acted as a silent shield. Without them, the balance broke. Some members of the council whispered among themselves, now unsure whether humanity was too powerful or too necessary. Because now they saw what the galaxy looked like without Earth watching from the shadows, and it was not the peaceful future they had hoped for. The council chamber was filled with quiet tension, a kind of stillness that only comes before a decision that could change everything. Representatives from hundreds of worlds sat in silence, watching the center platform where Dr. Marcus Wren stood once again, alone but steady. The vote was about to begin, a final decision on whether to permanently ban human military forces from all future joint operations. Despite recent events, some members still held to the belief that humanity's power was too great, too unknown, and too dangerous to be trusted in galactic affairs. Others, shaken by the sudden rise in chaos since Earth's withdrawal, were unsure. The balance of the galaxy now rested on a choice that was more than political. It was deeply personal. Dr. Wren raised his hand and asked for one final moment to speak, not as a soldier or a diplomat, but as a representative of a species that had never asked for war, yet had always prepared for it. With a slow breath, he opened a secure channel on the council's central console, typing in a long, encrypted code that only a few even knew existed. The chamber lights dimmed as a new file appeared in the air above him. Its title was simple, but it sent a chill through the room. Project Ashwinter. A few council members gasped. Others leaned forward in disbelief. The file was known only through whispers, a theoretical war plan, designed by Earth's most advanced military minds, not to be used, but to be understood. It was a complete analysis, showing how, if pushed to the edge, humanity could bring the entire Galactic Federation to its knees in 6 days. The simulations were terrifying in their precision. Communications cut, supply lines broken, fleets neutralized, no cities destroyed but every system frozen by coordinated pressure. Not a single shot fired unless required. No planets harmed unless necessary. Just control. Quiet. Total. And fast. Dr. Wren didn't smile. Didn't threaten. His voice was steady, almost tired. "This has never been used," he said. "And it never will be. It was built to understand the limits of power, not to test them." Many in the chamber couldn't look away. Some couldn't believe that a species capable of such overwhelming strategy had chosen restraint for so long. And that was the point. Wren looked around, then pressed a single command. The file began to dissolve. Line by line, code by code. Project Ashwinter was deleted, right there, in front of everyone. "We don't fight wars because we're good at it," he said. "We avoid them because no one wins when we do." His words echoed deeper than any speech that had come before. They weren't loud, but they carried weight, the kind that settles in the mind long after the sound is gone. The council sat still, caught between fear and respect, between logic and emotion. What they had seen today was not just Earth's capability, but its choice to never act unless forced. A kind of discipline that came not from peace, but from a long history of pain. Dr. Wren stepped back from the console, the space around him now quiet. "We don't ask for control," he said finally. "We ask for trust. And if you can't, give us that. We'll still protect what we can, even from a distance." As he returned to his seat, the council prepared for the vote. But now the choice no longer felt like a decision about power. It was about trust, about understanding the rare kind of strength that hides behind patience. And above all, it was about realizing that sometimes the most dangerous species is not the one that strikes first, but the one that never needs to. The chamber felt different now. The air was still heavy, but the weight had shifted, from fear to reflection. Delegates who had once questioned humanity's presence now sat quietly, glancing at one another, as if unsure how to speak what they were thinking. Some eyes lingered on Dr. Wren, who had returned to his seat with calm dignity, not triumph. There was no pride in his expression, only quiet hope that the galaxy had finally understood. After long hours of silence and whispered debate, the time came for the vote. One by one, the representatives stood and cast their choices into the glowing ring at the heart of the council floor. The light pulsed slowly, brighter with each decision, until it turned a steady gold, the sign of consensus. The High Arbiter, a long-lived being of crystalline form, rose and addressed the chamber with a voice that echoed like chimes in the wind. "By majority and wisdom," it said, "the Council declares that humanity shall remain an essential part of the galactic peacekeeping forces." There was a brief pause, and then it continued. "And a new clause shall be added to our most sacred laws, the Charter of Armed Conduct." A beam of light rose from the center platform, projecting the words across the dome for all to see. It was simple, yet powerful. The chamber was silent again, but this time it was the silence of respect. Not fear, not caution, but understanding. It was no longer about whether humans should fight, but whether they should ever have to. What the galaxy had learned over the course of this trial was not just about Earth's strength or strategy. It was about restraint. It was about a species that had been forged in fire and chose not to spread it. A species that could end wars in days, yet walked carefully to avoid starting any. Dr. Wren stood only once more, not to speak, but simply to nod in gratitude. The statement had been made. The decision had been reached. Nothing more needed to be said. Outside the council chambers, across the vast systems of the galaxy, news spread quickly. Colonists in fringe worlds breathed easier knowing Earth's silent ships might return to their borders. Smugglers paused, uncertain now of which paths were still safe. Pirates who once mocked the Council now reconsidered their movements. Across many planets, citizens looked to the stars and felt something new. Not fear of Earth, but comfort in its shadow. Not because humans were dangerous, but because they had proven what true peacekeeping looked like. A force that did not seek war, but would always be ready to stop one. And so, the galaxy finally understood why the law must stand. Why the words carved into the new clause were not a restriction, but a reminder. Because when humanity fights, they do not escalate, they end. They do not conquer, they correct. And they do not leave ruins, they leave order.